Mark Carney and the Liberal government's spending policies are costing the average worker $2,000 a year. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Most of you are aware that the Liberal government has had some pretty erratic spending over the last few years, especially, and that has increased the debt load. We're currently spending without even knowing what's going on, as we don't have a budget. And the parliamentary budgetary officer has forecasted that it's going to be two or three times what they had projected. Of course, it's the Canadian population that has to pay back those debts. And there's been a report released by the Fraser Institute talking about if we were to get the debt load back to even as it was pre-pandemic, the average Canadian worker, the average Canadian, would be taking home an additional $2,100 a year. That's a lot of money when you consider it. And I know that it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think that Mark Carney made a big fuss about giving Canadians an $800 tax credit, appreciate that this is nearly three times that. So how can, on the one hand, the Liberal government say that it's, this tax deal that this half a percentage point that they gave the Canadian population up to $800 for a family of two, whereas we're talking about for a family of two, $4,200, right? Because that's per worker. So if you got two people working in your house, it's $2,100 per worker. This, of course, has to be controlled only by the out of control spending by the Liberal government. And unfortunately, these numbers are not even up to date. They're 2023's numbers, I believe. So once the bill comes due for the current spending blitz that Mark Carney is going through, spending without telling us where it's going, though a considerable amount of it apparently is going toward the 5%. Some of it is going toward, a lot of it is going towards the immigration concern and paying for hotels and giving them a daily stipend for food. There's a lot of money that's going out that we really don't have any clue where it's going. I should imagine some of it is off to Ukraine. These debts that are being incurred will have to be paid back. Now let's take a quick look at the report, because it highlights some very strong inconsistencies in the story that the mainstream media is trying to tell you. Here's the article. Reducing government debt in Canada would boost incomes for the average worker by $2,100 a year. The impact of government debt on labor productivity in Canada. So it's what I'm talking about. It's not so much the spending. That's actually not what I should have been a little more clear. It's that they're borrowing money to spend. It's not that they are taking income from Canadians and putting it towards something and we're still operating at a profit. We are operating at a loss. We are working in the red, and the Liberal government is borrowing billions more to put us further and further into debt, which of course impacts so many things. And then the result of it is, for the average individual, $2,100 per year. Labor productivity plays a crucial role in powering the economic growth and improving living standards. Consequently, many commentators express their concerns of the slowdown of Canada's productivity. A legacy of the pandemic is the rise in budget deficits and government debt in both federal and provincial levels. Canada's ratio of general government gross debt to GDP surged by 28 points from 2019 to 2020, the highest among all the G7 countries. Currently, Canada has the seventh highest debt to ratio among 38 advanced economies. Now that's something that's important to think about, because Canadians are following an ideology that is harmful to industry. It's harmful to business investment. It's harmful to the underlying standard of living for all Canadians, whether they be brand new or whether they be 15 generations. This is why the importance of government, guys. This is what it boils down to: how they use their money, what rules they put in place to make the betterment of our lives. That's kind of the thing that we need to be talking about, right? Because Mark Carney is clearly not going to be able to negotiate with Donald Trump. And I'll say it right here. He might as well just quit horsing around. Tell Donald Trump that he'll accept the tariffs at 15% or whatever it happens to be, 10%, and we will put nothing on the Americans sending stuff into our country. Job done. Get on with it. You let us all down. You didn't accomplish what you said you were going to do. Instead, you're running around spending money that we don't have and taking that directly out of the pockets of Canadians and slowing down any of the revitalized economy that would help increase the tax base so that we could spend money without having to borrow it. This study investigates the impact of Canada's general government gross debt on labor productivity. It finds that a 10% point reduction in the ratio of general government gross debt to GDP increases the growth rate of labor productivity by about 1.04%. The study suggests that if Canada's ratio in general government gross debt to GDP were gradually reduced over 5 years to pre-pandemic levels, labor productivity would increase about 1.6% at the end of the fifth year, compared to the baseline scenario where there is no reduction. This would raise Canada's output per hour by $1.01 and could boost the annual income of an average employee working 40 hours a week to approximately $2,100 adjusted for inflation. As you sit here in the summertime and you look around your life and you think, geez, I wish I had a little bit extra money. I could go to that barbecue. I wish I had a little bit extra money. I could go buy some baseball tickets. I could send my kids off to day camp. I could pay for swimming lessons. I could do all of just pay for swimming in general, splashing around in the public pool. There's a lot of things that could happen if you had $2,100 a month. The government is trying to make you believe that by saving you $40 a month, they're doing you an enormous favor. So imagine if they had a policy in place that would allow you to have at least $2,100 back into your pocket instead of sending that $2,100 off to very rich people who are lending the country money. A key policy takeaway is that the government should curb deficit finance spending and reduce debt to reverse the slowdown in labor productivity. In this context, relying on credible fiscal anchors could help the government prevent excessive debt accumulation during adverse budgetary shocks. That just means they should stop borrowing money to spend it, because having a strong fiscal position is better if there's something that goes horribly wrong. Here's another report that was released by the Fraser Institute that's a supplemental. Well, it came out a little bit ahead of time, but you have to do a little bit of research, right? So the Liberal government's current position is that Canada has the lowest level of net debt as the share of the economy among the G7. Unfortunately, there's a problem. When calculating net debt, you subtract financial assets because you assume those assets could be used to offset the debt. The glaring problem here is that Canada's financial assets include the assets of the Canadian Pension Plan and the Quebec Pension Plan, which substantially reduce Canada's net debt. Indeed, according to the latest data from Statistics Canada, there were net assets of $716 billion in the combined CPP and QPP as of December 31st, 2023. So you have the Quebec pension plan and you have the Canada pension plan. That's the money being paid in. And ironically, I believe right now it's Brookfield that's looking after those pension plans. So that's something that we as Canadians need to be looking at when we see Mark Carney sitting there getting rich off of those pension plans. Nonetheless, they don't borrow money to pay those pensions. They have the money in cash or whatever. They have that in assets of $716.7 billion. When they take the bottom line and they say, well, what's your net ratio of debt? They add that number in there because they're assuming that it could pay off. So let's put this into a context of what you can understand. You get $10,000 on your credit card and you only got $3,000 in the bank and you got $7,000 in debt, but you have a $10,000 car. You say to yourself, well, if I get in real trouble, I can sell my car. And now I'm not in debt at all. In fact, I'm up $3,000. Which makes me better off than my neighbors, my seven neighbors. Unfortunately, that $716 billion cannot be spent that way. So they have it there trying to tell everybody that they're offsetting the debt, but they can't spend it that way. That is not permitted. That's why it's never been spent up to now. You don't think that every government that's ever looked at that kind of money said to themselves, well, if we just use the pension plan. But they can't. So it cannot be seen as something that's offsetting the debt. And when you remove that and take it into what's called the gross debt, well, here, I'll let the article explain it. Thankfully, there's a much more accurate way to measure Canada's indebtedness. Gross debt to GDP. Gross debt, according to the International Monetary Fund, includes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the debtor to the creditor, and excludes all liabilities that require future payments of interest and or principal by the deb And extending the analysis to include a broader group of advanced countries provides more accurate assessment of Canada's comparative indebtedness. According to the study, among 32 industrialized countries, Canada goes from the 5th to the 26th. As soon as you take out that pension plan money, we go from being 5th on the list of debt to GDP to 26th out of 32 countries. So we go from one, not too bad, to holy moly, those guys are way down there. We can't lend them any money. We cannot value their dollar very high. And don't believe for 1 second that the people that are balancing their budgets and looking after these kinds of things and take care of all of that, the International Monetary Fund, they are well aware of that. They're not counting that CPP. They know better. So when they look at the value of our dollar, when they look at the country and the overall economic health of our country, they're using this one, gross debt to GDP. Further, Canada's gross debt to GDP exceeds the total size of the national economy by nearly 5 percentage points. I'll say that again. Canada's gross debt exceeds the total size of the national economy by nearly 5 percentage points. In other words, Canada falls 21 positions in international ranking after switching from the net debt to the gross debt, the largest change by any country. And the money that we owe, when you count it as the gross debt, is more, it exceeds how much money we're making by 5%. Meaning that if we gave these debts every nickel that this country manufactures, we would still be 5% short of paying it off. This is the kind of economic irresponsibility that governments are supposed to be avoiding. This is the kind of thing that the government the Liberal government is trying to tell you that's not happening, while they run around saying they're investing in dentures, they're investing in daycares, they're investing in all of these things. But really, they're just running a tab that Canadians, it to hit the fan right now, cannot pay back. We literally owe 5% more than we make. Now, if you went to your bank and said, I want to borrow $1 million, but I only make $800,000, and the bank said, well, wait a minute, we can't lend you more than you make. So how is it that the country can get away with that while they're trying to artificially inflate the look of it by adding in the CPP, QPP, and artificially inflate, meaning it's not real. It's an illusion. It's a mask. And they can't say that to the International Monetary Fund, but they absolutely can say it to you. And if we don't get that debt under control, the only thing that's going to be the legacy of this government, the only thing that's going to be for the future, because you always hear the Liberal talking about the future. We're doing it for the future. The only thing we're doing for the future right now is saddling them with enormous debt. Debt that they, by these own numbers, currently could not pay back. Now, what kind of responsible people are we really if we're not looking after the people of our country? What kind of responsible government is it really if it's not taking its best steps to make sure that these kinds of things don't get out of control? If this was in your household, if your husband was running around every day, or your spouse, or whatever it happens to be, if they were running around every day putting you 5% in debt more than you actually make, do you think that you would just smile and say, no, everything is wonderful, everything is okay, let me be supportive? Or do you think you'd be, holy moly, you quit it because you're going to make my kids have no quality standard of living? We got to ask ourselves what's responsible and what are we looking for from our government? Because he obviously is not going to be the guy that takes on Donald Trump. Donald Trump put him in the corner like a little kid, and he's just sitting there waiting for the guy to nod to say, okay, here we go, we're going for the day. He's waiting on permission from Donald Trump, nothing else. Anything you try to convince yourself of is simply delusion. We don't have time for delusion, guys. We have to look after ourselves. We have to increase the productivity of this country. And I can tell you one way we can increase the productivity of this country. We get rid of C-69, we get rid of C-48, and all of a sudden the oil will flow. Now, that goes a huge way to not only increasing the GDP, but paying down the debt. And the more jobs that we have out there, we have more money going into the bank, into the government, right? Because if 100 people are working and they're all paying their taxes, then the government gets the taxes from 100 people. But if 1 million people are working, then they all get the taxes from 1 million people. And then you can take a look at how much tax money is coming in, and you can say, wait, we got all this amount, so we don't need as much from every individual person. And that is the right side of the aisle. That's the concept that the conservatives and Donald Trump and whatever they're called then, the Republicans and all of the people that are fiscally responsible often tend to be on that side of the aisle. And that's the nutshell of what's happening. Currently, you're being saddled every passing minute with every passing day. You're being saddled with debt that is literally 5% over what you can afford to pay. And the only thing that I see to understand and the only thing that we can do to solve the problem is to start to increase the productivity. Now, we know the United States is taking at least 35% of our industry. We know the United States is taking all of the oil that we can send them. So why are we not improving the standard of living in Canada by repealing these two bills? That would incentivize companies to come here and invest more money, because there would be more money laying around, and they could see that the government is not a fanatical group of hard-nosed, narrow-minded people, which would allow them to feel the comfort of investment. Because, you think of a company, you think a guy in his garage or getting in his pickup truck, or a woman in her car with her power shoes on. But these are massive corporations who are responsible to a board of shareholders who have to borrow the money from banks. They have to think these things through, and there's nowhere in there for emotion. It's all about calculation. It's all simply and fundamentally about money. And the part that you have to realize, the part that I'm going to bring it home with, is that Mark Carney understands that, because this is his entire job when he's not trying to pretend to you that he's a politician. We have bad leadership in this country, guys. They're putting us further and further and further in debt, and it's quite literally taking money directly out of your wallet. We have to do something about it, because this government is not going to be the ones to fix it. They're the ones that started it, and they're the ones that are keeping it going. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.